Welcome back to Lambda School's Intro to Web Development. In this class, we're going to be talking about control flow. So over the last couple of lessons, we've learned the basics of JavaScript. We've gone from what a variable is, creating a variable, three different ways, let, var, and const, what our primitive data types are with strings, numbers, booleans. We've learned math operators. We've done a little bit of math, learned what global objects were, kind of an intro on properties and methods. And you're like, okay, this is fine and dandy. We can write variables and pass them around and console log them, but when are we actually going to get to start writing some real code? When are we going to get to have the computer perform some actions, some real code? Well, you're in luck. This is the lesson for you. So all computer programs are essentially running based on the data they receive. We don't always run every bit of code that's on the screen. We have what's known as control flow, and this is essentially a fork in the road for the computer saying, if something looks this way or acts this way, run this code. If something looks this way or acts this way, run that code, etc. And so we give the computer options based on the data it receives. To start writing our first control flow, we need to learn about what's called an if statement. So an if statement is made up of a few parts here. First, we have the if. Obviously, we're telling the computer if this expression is true. If this is true, whatever we'll get into it later, how we can make this true or false, etc. If this is true, then run the code in between these two brackets. All right. So the code is only going to run if that expression is true. If the expression is not true, the code won't run. So here we have an if statement, right? We have our if, we have a parentheses with an expression in it. We haven't written the expression yet. Then we have these curly brackets to say whatever is inside of these. If this expression is true, run this code. So let's think about this. What's the most simple way we can tell an expression is true? If you said or thought to yourself a Boolean, then you are absolutely correct. And we have a Boolean that means true, and it's just true, right? Pretty simple. So we can just say if true, just to test this out. This obviously is not real life code here. You'd never, I wouldn't say never, but you probably wouldn't do this because we want it to only run if something is true. Let's just console log. Statement is true. And look at that. We got our console log out there, statement's true. And you're like, well, that doesn't really prove anything because that's just running the code. All right, let's change this to false. And now look, we've run our code and the console log did not happen. We can console log out here. This will run no matter what. And we get that. If we change this to true, we get the statement is true and this will run anyway. So our first if statement is complete. Remember, it's the keyword if, parentheses with an expression inside of it that's either going to be true or false, and then curly brackets and a console or any code you want to run. We've put a console log in here, but we can write any code we want to run. So now you might be thinking to yourself, how do we write an expression that's not just putting a Boolean in here as true? There's a couple of things we need to go over first, and then we'll come back and write an expression. First thing I want to talk about is a couple of concepts. We're going to take a step away from our control flow for a moment, and we're going to talk about these concepts. One is called undefined, and the other is called null. You may have seen these, or one, you may have seen undefined probably while you're writing code. And undefined is simply the computer telling us that what we're asking for does not exist. Undefined means does not exist. It is not defined in our computer. It's not defined in what's called our scope. It doesn't exist. You're asking for something that's not there. Okay, if you get undefined, it's always the computer that's telling us that it doesn't exist. Now, it's oftentimes confused with the concept of null, right? And undefined and null are both written as lowercase. They both essentially mean nothing, but null is actually a software developer somewhere is telling us that what we're asking for does exist, but it does not have a value. Null does not mean zero. Null does not mean negative infinity. Does not mean false. It means no value. Okay, so occasionally you're going to see something return as undefined or null. Just understand what these items mean. The second thing we're going to talk about is truthiness. So remember when I first introduced Booleans, I said that Booleans are pretty simple at first, right? They're true or false. That's all they are. But they can get a little bit more complex. And they're going to get a little bit more complex in this lesson and in the next one. But we'll just say that when JavaScript is expecting a Boolean and doesn't get one right off the bat, it's going to determine what the Boolean value of that item is. So just like in our if statement, if that expression isn't true or false at the end, JavaScript's going to do something called type coercion and make it true or false. So you may have something that doesn't mean true in there, and JavaScript's going to just pretend it means true. This isn't something that you should learn to utilize just yet, but it's something that you should learn to recognize if your if statements aren't working the way you want them to. So, items that JavaScript believes are the Boolean true are obviously the Boolean true. The number 1, remember when we said that Booleans are essentially low-level computer code, zeros and ones, where 0 means off, 1 means on? Well, it says that the number 1, or in fact any number, is true. A string, and this isn't what we call an empty string. There's actually a character in there, which is the space. So any string with characters, it could be a space, it could be a period, it could be a whole long string, JavaScript is going to believe to be true. An array and an object, which we'll learn about in a little bit, a function, is true. Some things that JavaScript is going to coerce to false. Obviously, the number 0, the Boolean false, and finally an empty string, not finally, but an empty string there, so quotes with literally nothing in it, the Boolean false. Look at this, undefined, it's going to believe to be false, and even though I said null does not equal false, JavaScript will still believe that it is false if it finds it in an if statement. So let's test this out. What if we had 0 in there? This will run anyways, but statement is not true. What if we had 1 in there? Statement is true. Remember that empty string? Not true. String with a space, maybe some other stuff in it. True. Okay, so just know that we're not going to really try to utilize that stuff, but if you had something like this in there, what is this expression going to be? Well, it's going to be 0, and it's going to be false. Try not to have anything like this in here, but just recognize what's happening and what it's going to read it as. Finally, we're going to talk about comparison operators. And comparison operators are going to compare two things. For right now, let's just compare numbers. It's pretty easy. You've probably seen a couple of these operators before. You've seen the less than, maybe you've seen the less than equals. You may have seen it written a little bit different, but it just means less than or equals to, the greater than, and the greater than or equals to. And those last two on there are a little funky. You may have never seen a triple equals or an exclamation double equals before. What that means, remember when I always say that an equal sign does not mean equality, that an equal sign means assignment, that triple equal sign there actually means equality. So it's going to say, are these two items equal to each other? That last one is going to say, are these two items not equal to each other? So what comparison operators do is they compare the two items and they return a Boolean. Always. They always return a Boolean, either true or false, period. They don't ever return anything else. So it's either going to be true or false when we use a comparison operator. Let's go use one. Okay, so remember, I just want to put up here our comparison operators. Are less than or equals to, greater than or equals to, equal or not equal. Okay, so let's do this. If 1 is greater than 1, what's this going to equal to? 1 greater than 1. Well, that's going to be false, right? So that's not going to run. What if I said 1 greater than or equals to 1? Well, 1 is equal to 1, so that's going to be true. Statement is true. Let's do something a little bit different. 100 greater than or equals to 1, true. Greater than 1, obviously true. Less than 1 is false, right? And let's get rid of this. I just want to see if that statement is true pops up. So what if 1 is less than 101? Then we have a statement is true. So we can see how we can start using these to do something. So what if I say, I'm going to say my age is 20. Okay, we have a variable here called age, and we've assigned that variable to the number 20. What if we said old enough to drink? Some sort of test for a bar or a liquor store or something that is going to test if a user is legally old enough to be there and old enough to consume alcohol. Well, we can say something like age is greater than or equal to 21, right? 21 is the federally mandated age to consume alcohol. So if age is greater than or equal to 21, say that, just console log that they're old enough to drink. And look at that. They're obviously not. So what if I said 22? What if the person was 22 years old? Now we get back old enough to drink. So you can see how control flow can start letting us return different things for different data. We're going to get into it a little bit deeper in the next lesson, but this is a great start and a great thing to start playing with. Remember our comparison operators, remember truthiness, and just know that this is always, the if statement's always going to expect a Boolean out of here. So if I said something like this, that's going to be really weird because this is not a comparison operator, right? It's an assignment operator. So just know that there can be some funky things that happen with these if statements. But we'll start playing around with them and we'll get a little bit deeper in the next lesson.